Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lindsay Davis. I'm the Acting Executive Director for the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, filling in for Jess Wall-Turner while she is out on maternity leave. And just going to tell you a little bit about ORR and what we're here to debut for you today. So ORR is the nation's leading coalition of outdoor recreation and trade associations. We're made up of 33 national members that serve more than 110,000 businesses, representing the full breadth of the outdoor recreation industry and the $788 billion economy from RVing, boating, skiing, off-roading, diving, and more. We've been really focused on supporting rural economies and their transition to recreation as a key driver for health, equitable access, and economic development across the country. Last year, the Recreation Economies for Rural Communities program launched through the EPA, USDA, Forest Service, and the Northern Border Regional Commission, providing technical assistance and guidance for recreation planning and implementation. Over 170 communities applied for this program, proving the demand across the country to transition to recreation economies, and overall 10 communities received funding and technical assistance through this pilot program. In conjunction with this work, ORR, with support from the VF Foundation, created a grant fund to further support 4 communities receiving funding to implement their economic revitalization plans through outdoor recreation projects, infrastructure, and activities. These grants are a key part of the public-private partnerships the agencies plan for and unlock additional federal grant opportunities for the communities. This year, ORR has been fortunate to have Chris Perkins, who you're going to hear from today, on our team as a fellow from the Yale School of Management and the Yale School of the Environment to guide us in creating another key tool for this work. In partnership with the Oregon State University Outdoor Recreation Economy Initiative and the National Governors Association Outdoor Recreation Learning Network, we now have a Rural Development Toolkit that he will be previewing today. This toolkit compiles best practices, diverse perspectives, and outside resources related to building recreation economies in rural communities across the country. It was compiled through interviews with over 60 stakeholders who work to build the outdoor recreation economy at various scales, from nonprofit community groups, service corps, advocacy and trade associations, and state and federal agencies, many of whom are joining us this morning. Also linked throughout is a list of federal grants and technical assistance and ORR member resources to support recreation economy development. This resource will help create outdoor access in communities with recreation assets and grow recreation economies at a time when jobs and revitalization through the outdoors are needed the most. With that, allow me to introduce Chris Perkins and the panel of expert practitioners we have lined up for you today to preview this new tool.
Awesome. Thanks, Lindsay. This is so cool. I'm just going to get up my slides here. Looking at the attendee list for this webinar, hundreds of people across the country interested in building outdoor recreation economies. And so it's so exciting to be able to share this work that we've been working on for the past several months with you all. Like Lindsay said, my name is Chris Perkins. I'm currently a joint degree student at the Yale School of the Environment and Yale School of Management in my final semester. And I've been very fortunate to work with ORR on various topics since last May, but with a particular focus on our rural economic development work, one resource of which you'll see today. So just a quick outline of the next hour. I'll spend the first 20 minutes or so walking through some major sections of the toolkit, and then bring in some amazing panelists who do this work for a living to provide some more insight on how recreation economies are built in practice. We'll have about 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So as questions arise, please feel free to write them in the box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, and we'll take them at the end. So I thought it might be useful to just share a quick anecdote about the inspiration behind this work. In May of 2020, I was chatting with Rachel Schmidt, who is the outgoing director of the State Office of Outdoor Rec in Montana. And what Rachel said really stuck with me. She said, there are so many amazing communities in Montana with interest in building outdoor rec economies, but I'm a small office and they often come to me at step 1 in the process And it would be so useful to have a resource that helps these communities get to step 6 or 7 so that we can maximize the efficiency of all the various agencies that can support. So with Rachel's words in the front of my mind, I set out to interview some amazing practitioners who do this work across sectors. And I'll just emphasize that this resource is intended to be complementary to the amazing work that you all do already. In particular, I think about the EPA Recreation Economies for Rural Communities program led by Steph Bertena, USDA Rural Development, all the great work at the Forest Service, the Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program at the National Park Service, or any of you who do community-oriented economic development work. The other thing to point out is that this is currently in its online form, the form you'll see today, but it also exists in a PDF. So for certain communities that don't have great access to internet bandwidth, this can be downloaded for offline viewing. So before I jump in, I just want to jump to the end because I have some big thank yous for the work. First, just to the team at ORR. So Cody, Ben, Lindsay, and Jess have just been so wonderful to work with in this process. Great mentorship and just exposure for me as I just learn more about the outdoor rec industry. Particularly Jess, I hope you're getting some very well-deserved rest out there. We've also been super fortunate to have the support of the Oregon State University Outdoor Recreation Economy Initiative. They're focused on developing a powerful new approach to workforce development and leadership training in the outdoor industry. And they also provided all the design work that made this toolkit into the form that you see today. So a shout out to Lee, Aaron, Meredith, Paula, and especially Danny Powers, who's their manager of learning experience design and translated the white paper that came out of this work into the very immersive tool that you see today. And finally, a big thanks to the National Governors Association and the Outdoor Recreation Learning Network. They bring together stakeholders from around the country to talk about the future of outdoor recreation economies, and it's been a great supporter of this work. I also want to shout out the research participants that were willing to participate in creating this toolkit. They range across sectors from ORR members to local state officials, marketing specialists, economic development groups, NGOs, academics, federal agencies, and of course, the state directors of offices of outdoor recreation who promote this work in the states. You'll hear from Axie today, who does this work in New Mexico. So let's jump right in. I'm going to do my best to give you a comprehensive look at this toolkit. But of course, in the time we have today, I won't be able to cover everything. So I'm going to focus on some sections that seem especially important to this work. And this toolkit will go live following this webinar. So we encourage you to look at it on your own time as well to get the full breadth of the resources. So the central idea of this toolkit is that outdoor recreation offers opportunities for sustainable economic and community development in the United States, and particularly in rural America. But this work is super complicated, and this first page is for readers to self-select into the level of knowledge that they arrive with and use that knowledge to choose the section of the toolkit that's most applicable to their work or their level of knowledge. I'll also flag here this black button that says see more, links to a list of federal grants and technical assistance, as well as contributions from ORR members that support the development of outdoor recreation economies across the United States. So you'll see this button throughout, and we encourage you to consult this list to understand all the various federal and private sector resources from ORR members. Those of you on the call are probably well aware of dynamics in rural America right now. Rural America faces significant challenges, whether high poverty rates, depopulation, a lack of critical infrastructure, and as a recent report from Headwaters Economics underscored, fiscal policy that has constrained the ability of governments to grow. And worth noting that these impacts are often more pronounced for Black, Latino, or Hispanic, and or Native American residents. And all these dynamics existed before COVID-19, which through measures of social distancing and economic shutdown added increased pressures on communities. And this page provides mostly background, but what you'll see here are quotes from practitioners in the field, and these are included throughout the resource. So this is Nathan Fay, who does this work as the State Director of Outdoor Recreation in Colorado, and Rachel Schmidt, who I mentioned earlier. And worth noting before we go on is that rural America is not a monolith. Every community is unique from the one next to it as a result of their socioeconomic status, racial or ethnic background, political affiliation, tribal status, access to natural resources, whatever it might be. So the economic approach that agencies take or community organizations take must really be informed by place. Most on this call are probably familiar with the outdoor recreation economy, but for those who are less familiar, this page outlines what we mean when we talk about the outdoor recreation economy. So natural and built assets within or adjacent to a community that enable outdoor recreation and its associated economic, social, health, and environmental benefits. This page also links to the outdoor recreation satellite account at the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which allows for states to understand the impact of outdoor recreation in their state. And again, some fantastic research from Headwaters Economics. Tons of examples of recreation communities throughout. This one is a link to a video showcasing the Wayne National Forest in southeastern Ohio, and in particular, the Bailey Trail System, which is being built to create a mountain biking destination and invigorate the economy of the town. This page is really the backbone of the toolkit, a roadmap of sorts. And what we tried to do is distill the conversations with practitioners over the past several months into 15 or so best practices that inform the development of outdoor recreation economies at any geography or scale. And I'll be touching on many of these best practices today. And I'll just note that these boxes correspond to the table of contents at left. So let's jump right in. Local champions are so important in this work, and that was a big theme that came out of my conversations with practitioners. Market REI talks about the value of residential local leadership. If there's not local leadership that's committed behind recreation economy development, it's not going to happen. So one consistent theme is that for outdoor recreation to take hold as a viable economic driver within rural communities, the community must already have access to outdoor recreation assets and exhibit a passion for outdoor rec. John Snyder from Washington State underscores this, saying that when these efforts come from the top, from local or state government, they're viewed with some suspicion. And so it's super important that this comes from the grassroots. As Pitt notes, these are the folks who are doing, who are taking on the administrative burden, whether it's grant writing or just sort of building the political capital necessary to build these economies. And as Laurel from SORP notes here, it may be worth compensating the local leaders who take on this work. Great opportunity for economic development organizations or other nonprofits to step in and support the development of these economies. I mentioned just great community examples throughout, and one I want to highlight is the Granite Backcountry Alliance up in New Hampshire, which is working on the White Mountain National Forest to cut glades on Forest Service land for backcountry skiing, and has really built an inspiring coalition within the community to support this work. Consistent messaging also came up frequently in interviews. The main buckets for why outdoor recreation economies have value can be lumped into economics and public health. Again, Headwaters Economics talks about the value of recreation counties. There are, of course, short-term benefits for tourism-related businesses, But importantly, it's not just about tourism. There are longer term benefits like recruiting new residents who might be business owners, entrepreneurs, or workers. Outdoor rec creates jobs in other sectors through employee recruitment and retention. It generates tax revenues, it raises property values, and improves public health. And on the topic of public health, there's some great examples of studies linking to the health benefits of time in nature. More examples of messaging on outdoor rec, and again, place-based messaging is so important here. You'll learn more about the PA Wilds in Pennsylvania under the leadership of Ta Enos. But there's some great quotes down below from practitioners from around the United States who talk about ways that they've messaged outdoor recreation effectively in communities. So Jim Glover from New Mexico talking about live, work, play, and stay as central tenets behind the development of these economies. Ta Enos talking about making a community and the major employers located there more competitive. Randy Carpenter talking about communities building on assets they already have. And Jack Morgan referencing the resistance to cyclical economies and thinking about the outdoor economy beyond tourism as an opportunity for outdoor assets to retain and attract a talented workforce and spark business growth in other sectors. The Build Collaborative section is sort of a thesis statement for this work, if I had to identify one. And I want to give a lot of credit to, again, to the Recreation Economy for Rural Communities program under the leadership of Steph Bertena and her team. It's important to bring together collaboratives that represent the diversity of interests in the community. So in this case, cross-sector, committed, and dedicated with representatives across sectors. And on this page, you can see some examples of various groups and stakeholders who've been brought to some of these collaboratives to build outdoor economies that truly represent everyone's interests. And later in the toolkit, for more examples of these outdoor rec collaboratives, in section 25, you can actually scroll through and see what other communities around the country are doing to promote outdoor recreation. So here are just some awesome examples of collaboratives that have formed. Some have a more business focus, some have more of a community economic development focus, some about public health, but all committed to the development of outdoor recreation economies. Some more wonderful examples of organic community work to build these economies. And you're going to hear later from Toby Bloom, who works at the United States Forest Service. But this section is really about the importance of bringing public sector partners to the table. And these folks are so important because they understand community needs. They understand the assets that are available for use. And they also can help navigate the sometimes difficult requirements to fill out grants and technical assistance, particularly at the federal level. So we'll hear more from Toby later about best practices for bringing federal partners to the table and the sorts of outcomes that result. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. This section really goes hand in hand with the importance of building representative collaboratives in the community and developing an outreach strategy that is culturally relevant. Gabe from the city of Las Cruces, New Mexico, talks about making a culturally conscious approach and not imposing cultural norms across communities. I'll just reiterate that rural America is not a monolith. These communities are quite unique from one another in their socioeconomics, in their racial ethnic background, politics, tribal status, access to natural resources, et cetera. So here's a great example of Axie, who you'll also hear from later, connecting with her constituents in a way that resonates with them. Kristen at the Trust for Public Land talks about being invited to a space rather than making the space by themselves. And I'll just point out here the importance of including tribes in this process. The history of genocide and forcible relocation of Indigenous peoples from today's public lands is horrific and painful to this day. There are no easy solutions to restore justice to the tribes, but one important gesture is including them at the table in these planning efforts to participate in the visioning process for relationships with natural resources. One great example of such a partnership is between the Elliottsville Foundation and the Penobscot Nation in Maine, where recently they agreed to a return of over 700 acres of land to the tribes to restore stewardship. And here's just a fantastic example from Tucumcari, New Mexico. This is the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program through the National Park Service. And Attila outlines just a great community-centric approach to building these economies. State and local agencies can also really support these collaboratives by developing professional development opportunities. Laurel and Amy both note that, for a lot of these folks, the idea of giving their full effort to an outdoor rec collaborative comes alongside managing a business, maybe running a ranch as well. These folks have a lot on their plate. And so anything that the state and local agency can do to support these folks with professional development opportunities can be incredibly helpful. So these are things like leadership development academies, outdoor rec incubator grants, grant writing training, making lists of grants, loans, and technical assistance easily available. I'm going to skip ahead a bit to funding partners. The importance of broadly representative stakeholder groups is again so important here. Having the right people at the table to talk about the future of outdoor recreation in a given community can help unlock various opportunities, grants, technical assistance, in-kind support, etc. As Merrill Harrell notes here, even a small grant can be incredibly helpful in a number of ways, like paying for the time of a local employee to develop applications for additional funding, paying for small projects, or providing seed funding. And so in this section, I tried to capture all the various funding sources that communities have used to help build their outdoor recreation economies, whether federal agencies, local government, national nonprofits, other private funders, state government, and everything in between. A number of states, as shown here in green, actually have outdoor recreation specific grants that really help provide catalytic funding to help take these economies off the ground. I just love this example from rural West Virginia. This is the Mon Forest Towns Partnership, which is basically a dozen rural towns around the Monongahela National Forest. And Doug Arbogast, who's looking super badass here on the right, is at the West Virginia University Extension Service. And he shared more details about the funding mix that they've utilized to help build these recreation economies. So it's a partnership between the Appalachian Regional Commission, the EDA, the Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation, USDA Rural Community Development Initiative, and small funds from the Forest Service alongside West Virginia University research grants. A couple more sections here, and then we'll jump into the panel. Outdoor recreation economies are not without their pitfalls. And all of you can probably think of an example or two of places that experience pressures from tourism. And so what this section really identifies is the importance of proactive planning to address some of these challenges. Issues like traffic management, housing affordability, wildlife impacts, new business developments, healthcare services, basic infrastructure, et cetera, are things that should be raised proactively rather than reactively. Emily from Moab talked about zoning for authenticity as a practice that communities can incorporate early on into their planning. I just want to highlight the Colorado Tourism Roadmap here, which talks about some of this planning in advance of economy development. Value capture is also just such a big part of this work. If communities don't feel the economic benefits of outdoor recreation, it won't benefit everyone in an equitable manner. So Katie, who you'll hear from later at the Conservation Fund, talks about the importance of a holistic approach, things like permitting and infrastructure for business administration, and incorporating the entire value chain in the development of the economy. Molly from the Appalachian Regional Commission echoed a lot of these sentiments, saying that they really work with communities to build opportunities to spend money as soon as they get off trail. Things like music, arts and crafts, etc. So that during their visit, they contribute heavily to the community's economy. And finally, I just want to touch on attracting and supporting outdoor business. Stephanie Pack at EDC Utah was incredibly important in outlining some of the resources in Utah that exist to support outdoor businesses laying their roots in communities. So these are manufacturing programs like job incentives, tax incentives, opportunity zone enhancement programs, micro manufacturing hubs, grants, loans, forgivable assistance, and a couple others. And again, I'll point out the great work going on at Oregon State University, where they're developing a consortium to bring together states in talking about the future of the outdoor economy workforce and identify critical needs. This toolkit wouldn't be complete if it didn't also talk about some of the major challenges to developing outdoor rec economies. One is just a rightful skepticism about new economic ventures. I think Sarah really hit it on the head here when she talks about a multi-generational hardening towards future downturns. When you've been in a boom bust cycle for hundreds of years, you have an ingrained hopelessness, and even a good economic development strategy can feel daunting. So I'll just reemphasize the importance of trust building and representative community collaboratives in this work. There are also valid concerns about the environmental impact of getting more people outside. One of the best parts of COVID has been seeing how many people are engaging in outdoor recreation. But of course, we need to think about those impacts proactively. And so I'll reemphasize the value of bringing land managers to the table to talk about sustainable recreation. I was very fortunate last week to sit in on a call with the California Recreate Responsibly Coalition. This is a group of stakeholders who've created a network to talk about land management pressures across the state, across agencies, and develop strategies for sustainable use. Of course, considering the impact of climate change, these pressures are even more acute. Administrative bandwidth is also a challenge. Like I said earlier, some of the folks who might be running collaboratives also have businesses to run on the side and other jobs. So a great opportunity here is for nonprofits to step in and provide facilitation, administrative support, funding, so that collaboratives can meet consistently around the same table and have all the professional development support they need to get this work off the ground. Complex grant requirements were also mentioned frequently as one of the challenges in this work, particularly about the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which for the layperson is a difficult grant process to navigate. Professional development opportunities are again super important here. Shout out to the CORE network. This is one of ORR's members, and they have more than 200 active member organizations across the country who do trail work and development at the fraction of a cost of a private consultant. And finally, there's just difficulty acquiring the funding match for grants, particularly in the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Communities are required to put up 50% of the cost to fund projects. So if you're a community of a couple thousand people, you might struggle to raise that funding compared to a more well-endowed state or well-endowed community. So this can lead to a sort of inequitable disbursement of funds to larger communities. I think one takeaway is that there's a great opportunity here for the private sector, as well as local economic development groups or NGOs to jump in and support communities in reaching this funding match. And I'll just point out in the appendix, there were a bunch of amazing ideas that just didn't fit conveniently in other sections. For instance, partnering with active transportation efforts. Taldi from REI just had a great thought about focusing efforts around the transportation reauthorization bill. Of course, the outdoor industry can continue to lean into the political process. We're at the dawn of a new administration that has great ambitions for rural economic development. This is a great opportunity for the outdoor industry to have its voice heard. I think I'll pause here for the sake of time, but I'll leave you with this last quote from Lucas St. Clair. that I feel especially motivating on a day like today. What if the outdoor industry were to have an equivalent of the American Petroleum Institute? How do we make sure that every individual in America thinks that protecting public lands so that industries can thrive is a good thing, in the same way that we decided Ford F-150 trucks were the best flag-waving thing out there? So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and bring our panelists into the conversation. This is the part that I'm most excited about, because these are folks who do this work on a daily basis and have a lot of insight in the development of outdoor recreation economies. We're fortunate to have three panelists with us today. This is Axie Navas from the state of New Mexico, Toby Bloom from the Forest Service, and Katie Allen from the Conservation Fund. I'm hoping that each of you can briefly introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your work. So let's go Axie, Toby, then Katie.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's an honor to be here today. My name is Axie Navas. I'm the director of the New Mexico Outdoor Recreation Division within the Economic Development Department here in New Mexico. And I get really excited about this resource because I get a lot of those same questions that Rachel had apparently articulated to you, Chris, a little while ago, that this is just going to be so invaluable to those groups. So thanks.
Go for it, Toby.
Okay, there we go. Hi, I'm Toby Bloom. I'm the National Program Manager for Travel, Tourism, and Interpretation for the U.S. Forest Service. And we do this work all over the country in conjunction with our gateway communities, which are communities that border our national forests. We've had a lot of really exciting success over the past few years, even reaching back as far as 2010. So looking forward to having a really good resource out there to jumpstart this work.
Hi, everybody. My name is Katie Allen. I'm the director of the Conservation Leadership Network at the Conservation Fund, and want to thank ORR and my fellow panelists for being part of today's event, and all of you joining. It's great to see so many folks that I've worked with at the Conservation Fund and our Leadership Network. I direct and oversee our management of community and economic development activities, and a lot of that is based in community capacity building and technical assistance services. So folks that have joined our Balancing Nature and Commerce program, or Appalachian Gateway Community Initiative, or most recently our help with the recreation economies for rural communities. All of these function to serve as a catalytic mechanism to bring coalitions together. And so we're on the ground working with communities across the country, and look forward to the discussion today and this outstanding toolkit and how we can use it moving forward.
Wonderful. Well, I'm particularly excited about this panel because they approach this work through different lenses. Axie at the state level, Toby from a federal agency, and Katie from an NGO. And I want to first start with Axie. Axie, the first few best practices in this toolkit talk about identifying and empowering local champions and utilizing consistent messaging to share the benefits of outdoor rec communities. Could you just share a little bit about what you've observed through your work in New Mexico about the elements of successful grassroots efforts to build outdoor rec economies?
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'll give two examples to try and articulate this. And the first, I want to point our attention to Farmington in northern New Mexico. And I think we have a few Farmington representatives on the call today. I've noticed their chats. Jim Glover, good to see you here. I think the unifying thread here in this fabric is just what you articulated: united leaders behind united narrative. And in Farmington, that's really clear with the Outdoor Recreation Industry Initiative, and then marketing around Jolt Your Journey, that leaders within that city, within that county, have put together in order to articulate the power of diversifying their economy through outdoor recreation. And the message there is just that: diversifying the economy, as well as thinking about outdoor recreation not as an amenity, but as a must-have, which is such a clear message within this toolkit today. So what does that look like in practice? It means investing in community access for all the public health gains that the city will then see. A lot of investment has gone into the municipal lake in Farmington to make sure that that is an amenity for people who live in the city, in the county. They've invested in outdoor recreation infrastructure for businesses to attract businesses to the city, because it's a hub for outdoor recreation, because of the amazing amenities that are there, and then also the energy among local leadership. So it's a tourism draw, and then it's also a public health benefit. It's an economic development strategy. And I think that vision is something that Farmington has articulated really well, and sets an example for other communities throughout the state. The other example I want to bring up is Grants, which is also one of the communities that went through the Recreation Economy for Rural Communities program. And they too are doing an amazing job uniting local leaders around this shared vision. They're telling the story of what does outdoor recreation look like for our community, both to share within the local municipality, within the county, among their residents, among future businesses and existing businesses. And then that's also a narrative that gets translated to the broader strategy of what does outdoor recreation look like for this area. And so the state is an active supporter of both those efforts, just as examples, both through funding, through technical assistance, through promotion, through brainstorming, with calls all the time with local leaders, just talking about what can the state offer to help advance the work that's going on at the grassroots level. So I think that's where it starts. That's the catalyst for action, and we want to be a partner however we can.
Actually, such great examples from Grants and Farmington, both communities that we've had our eye on at ORR as well. Toby and Katie, I wonder if you have anything to add about elements of successful community collaborative building and grassroots efforts.
Sure. Well, I'll just jump in and say at the grassroots level, just make sure that you include the federal agencies that are around you and the folks that work there. I think typically a lot of times what we encounter is that there is some resistance or maybe intimidation of reaching out to a federal agency. But as you can see, we're just people too. And we're here to work with you. And so the more that we are in touch with your folks, and we're talking at the local level. I mean, you don't have to call me in the Washington office to do this work. If you want to, I can put you in touch with somebody locally. But I think it's really important to establish these relationships, not just around recreation economy, but around, the vision for the communities and the land management that we're doing in general. And so establishing those relationships with the local land managers, even at the federal level, is super important. I think people will be pleasantly surprised at how willing Forest Service and other agency folks are to engage in this work.
And I was just going to add, I think we're going to say catalyze a lot, and that there's really this energy that needs to be brought from the grassroots and to be supported by the local leadership and the federal partners, just as Toby articulated. And there's a bit of a tension though, because these folks are really just energized volunteers, but they've got so much on their plate. And so to think looking forward how these collaborative and vision that these local leaders bring from the grassroots can be met with that really substantial need to stand them up with, whether it's funding or capacity or filling in some gaps there, just as that partnership that the federal partners can bring. We don't want to exhaust these great partnerships and think about the collaborative ways that they can move forward. So thinking about how moving forward as this exciting movement moves, what type of resources can be really filtered into these grassroots capacity building efforts right at that beginning to catalyze that momentum and bring in that sophistication moving forward.
Thanks, Katie. And on the note of partnerships, and particularly with federal partners, I want to turn to you, Toby. One thing I really was struck by in our conversation was the value of having the Forest Service at the table because they know the community so well, and they have creative ideas to work outside the confines of forests. So could you just talk a little bit more or just share some ideas about how this has played out in practice using the Forest Service as a partner to collect to various other federal grants, technical assistance?
Sure. Well, and I think that's that's a really exciting thing that's happening across this particular area of the economy, is that we're all starting to find each other, because I think the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the ORSA account, as we started getting these numbers and realizing how important the recreation economy is, not only is there more sort of political will to gather, but we started connecting with each other. And I think, it's kind of similar what happens in the federal agencies. We're all very large agencies and we have a tendency to be siloed. But the really exciting part of the relationship that we have in Forest Service with USDA Rural Development is that previously, it really took somebody kind of reaching out to the local communities to be able to help beyond the boundaries of the forest. And that's still important, but with our collaboration with USDA Rural Development, we're also able to really put folks in front of other agencies like Rural Development, that is basically a loan bank. They also have other business services. And so we can combine our knowledge of the local community and those relationships that we have working on land management and recreation development with the financial and business services that are available through USDA Rural Development. And I think that that is just kind of a small microcosm of what needs to happen in these recreation economies anyway, is really establishing the relationships and establishing the networks. And understanding that even if your company or your agency doesn't have the word recreation in it, you're still a part of developing this economy and you can still play a really important role. So I think from the very beginning, it's important to cast a wide net, not just with the federal agencies, but with your local communities. And within the federal agencies, as we are also kind of learning about the importance of recreation economies across the agencies, we too are looking for ways to collaborate.
Axie or Katie, any other thoughts on collaborating with public sector partners? I'm also thinking about the local and state level as well.
Yeah, I'll jump in there really quick because I feel like this dovetails so closely with the mission of the Outdoor Rec Division in New Mexico. To echo so much of what Toby just said, it is about casting a wide net, and I think it's getting creative with some of these networks. So part of my job here in the Outdoor Rec Division is to act as connective tissue between all these, the federal agencies, the other state departments, some of our amazing nonprofits, our private sector, and get creative about how all of us can work together to advance some of these opportunities at the local, regional, and statewide level. In economic development, groups like the EDA, the SBDC, those types of economic development organizations can be so beneficial to advancing some of the goals we're talking about here. And often how we get that ball rolling is through conversations with a mayor in a city in New Mexico about how resources like that at the federal level can then be used to grow outdoor recreation access throughout New Mexico. And then I would also say it's both that big 30,000 foot view of being creative about these networks, and then also thinking specifically about partnerships that can advance specific outdoor rec goals. I think about National Park Service and the RTCA program. My office is working with them to advance some workforce development strategies for New Mexico. How do we build a pipeline for young New Mexicans, for New Mexicans to transition into an outdoor recreation career? How do we work together with all these groups, educators, federal agencies, to create that pathway? And National Park Service in that particular program, RTCA, has been amazing in that regard. And I see that same potential with programs like we've talked about today, the recreation economy for rural communities. So I think it's both having your eye on some of those very specific technical assistance programs, and then also being creative with some of those broader ones, like what, again, the EDA has to offer.
Katie, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight the importance of those low-hanging fruit. I think that the partnerships can really engage right from the get-go and spur that momentum. I think about the Forest Service and their engagement with local communities, and it could be around leveraging already, planning efforts, whether it's where signage is directed, how it can connect downtown to those local assets. Some of these things already have funding, and they just kind of need that community input to direct that. And also, I think, the momentum and catalytic grants like the ORR provided to the recreation economy of rural communities programs of just getting, a trailhead developed, or maybe some connections going, or elevating some branding and marketing capacity. That not only signals to that group that they're onto something, but the onlookers of the community start to understand what that community is reflecting, that they can provide input on that, how they want to see their character defined, and then signaling to the partners around them and those onlookers that they're really serious about making some changes and creating some good projects moving forward that are going to be ultimately funded, because they've got that vision and they're making some, they might be low hanging fruit, but that's really how things get started.
Katie, that note on having a consistent vision, I think leads us into this last question. In talking with you, you really identify the importance of value capture across economies and having every stakeholder in the process of economy development aware of opportunities to capture economic activity. Could you talk a little bit about the work you do with the Conservation Fund to work across sectors in communities that build around outdoor recreation assets?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of this reflects what Axie and Toby brought up. We do see that the most successful communities that we work with are going to take a holistic approach to collaboration and are looking cross-sector. And through our work, we really do hold up hallmarks of sustainability for a community. And I think some of our traditional, you want to look at providing transportation choices for residents, workers, and visitors to access work, play, and education. You also want to look at equitable and affordable housing and lodging choices that are going to meet the needs of residents, workers, and visitors. But where things for a recreation economy, I think, start to diverge is where you are really going to look at enhancing the economic competitiveness by valuing public lands, natural and cultural and recreation and environmental assets to the same level as other assets and amenities, and how those are going to foster social and environmental and public health. And that comes to the leadership and decision-making where this brand or value proposition needs to be adopted across all of the sectors of a community. And supporting rural communities to sustain their rural character also becomes incredibly important. And I think examples of voluntary design guidelines to even more sophisticated tools in tax structures or non-voluntary stewardship funding mechanisms support that and support downtown revitalization and historic preservation and conservation of natural assets. But all of these should consider and include the significant cultural and traditional values of the community at large, at full community representation and how character is essentially defined. So we work with those communities to set, ask those questions and begin to set the format to catalyze some of that action. And I think many communities find themselves in a transitioning economy. Maybe it's away from extractive industries, which is a long process and we're still in it. But the onset of COVID-19 has exacerbated the gaps. And I think if anything, has demonstrated how much people cherish the outdoors. And this is, these communities can't wait for a new industry to pop up and really fill in those gaps, but outdoor recreation is there already. It's any community can use it as an economic development strategy, but the value has to be acknowledged across all of the sectors, from business and workforce development and health and education to affordable housing and transportation. And the equity and inclusion should be forefront of those decisions. Outdoor recreation provides just the platform to engage the full community. But what ultimately comes would be improving quality of life and sustaining that rural, traditional, cultural value of the character of that place as the essential outcome. And so I think acknowledging the full value of outdoor recreation should develop champions across the community's leadership. When downtowns realize that they have an untapped customer base hiking around them, or their hospitals and public health entities realize they can reduce health risks and health indicators at the community level in some of the most unhealthy populations in rural America. And when businesses and industry realize high quality of life will attract highly skilled workers as competitive as any urban area, then that narrative really switches. And that's when, again, that value proposition has to be adopted. So at the Conservation Fund, we really see the niche of catalyzing and building that collaborative around understanding and having that knowledge at hand, and really have enjoyed being part of the Recreation Economies for Rural Communities program, where again, I think we've seen the demand is there and each community is unique, but across the board, there's demand and need for developing those physical connections to recreation, or to developing those brands where they're not really sure where to go, and how to start to build the momentum to get things done, and to build that roadmap where a lot of these communities just haven't had it, because it hasn't been part of like the traditional model. So we like to see, I think the last piece of what I would like to say is that these programs are spurring and catalyzing relationships and providing this knowledge and understanding value. And so once folks understand that, there's probably that want to capitalize on that to the fullest extent. However, unlike some other industries, outdoor recreation is reliant on the experience of the user. So at the most beautiful trash-free overlook, or the meandering clean river, or knowing that you're safe to go outside, or that your mobility access is going to be met, or that there are facilities like bathrooms nearby, that's an experience that for the user that needs to be met. And stewardship is a unique element of the type of this outdoor recreation sector. So conservation is going to be incredibly important, as not just for the downtown to understand that they can tap this space, but they need to also continue to provide that same experience for all folks, in perpetuity. So I think when a community begins to express themselves in a brand as elevating recreation or their value of recreation, they also need to think about how they're internally responsible to stay true to that brand and express it thoughtfully and intentionally, and safeguarding those resources. And so I think data is going to be really incredibly important of how folks are using it. Looking at how management efforts like disbursement can alleviate overcrowding is important. And overall, it's knowing what that character of the community means. What does it look like? What does it really provide for folks? It doesn't have to mean no development, but communities can dictate what kind of development and where and why, because outdoor recreation is commingled so incredibly with all of these different sectors. And to think about what's the most, I think ultimately what we can build is some of the most sustainable, resilient rural places, not just for recreation, but in terms of public health and quality of life and overall equity and access to community services.
Katie, that was such a wonderfully comprehensive answer, and I appreciate the lens you brought to the process of incorporating value capture across a community. I want to make some time for questions from the audience. I just wanted to make sure that Toby or Axie didn't have anything else to add on that question.
I would jump in with just 3 things that really stood out to me. One is just that comprehensive look at never losing focus with the North Star metric here of quality of life, thinking about how quality of life can be improved through outdoor recreation in our rural communities. And I think tying so much of tying these outdoor recreation conversations we're having with Main Street, with downtowns is essential. That's another part where I'm frankly really grateful my office is within the economic development department, because our amazing Main Street program, they are direct colleagues. So we're working together to say, how can we use Main Street technical assistance, the pros over at Main Street, to have this conversation and to actually bring this holistic look to our communities, like grants that have an incredible downtown, incredible outdoor assets. If you're going to grow awareness of the outdoor recreation economy here, how do you make sure that Main Street benefits? So I think that's really key. And then also this question about a balance, that never-ending growth can't be the goal either. And that's also where I think destination management, that piece of the toolkit, becomes so important. We have to have that foresight from the very beginning. Otherwise, we're going to see negative impacts. And I think about that in relation to conversations I've had with a number of the tribes and pueblos in this state that have seen real impacts from the growth of outdoor recreation, have seen trespassing on their sacred lands. And considering that we are all on occupied land here in New Mexico and in the rest of the country, I think taking the lead from these conversations is essential to say, it's got to be a balance. We have to think about how our marketing, how our conversations, how our promotion, how our investments plays out into these long-term conversations about impact. And then finally, how we think about it increasingly in New Mexico is through this stewardship lens, and our kids, the next generation, who these folks are going to transform what the outdoors looks like. They already are, and they're going to continue to do so. So one of the pieces of working in this office that I'm most proud of, that I get to work within, is the Outdoor Equity Fund. And that's all about getting kids from underserved communities outside. It's all about developing stewardship and investing in our own. So I'm so proud that I get to work with that program. I get to take the lead from many of our Indigenous leaders, many of our Latinx leaders who led the way in New Mexico and are leading the way nationally in that conversation.
Wonderful, Axie. Toby, anything else?
No, I mean, I think what Katie and Axie were spot on with what they were saying. I'll just take this moment to let everybody know that in the chat box, I added the Recreation Economy Resource Guide that talks about the initiative between Forest Service and USDA Rural Development, has some examples of the projects that we've funded and how we've developed those in the past. And then I noticed that Vince Palmier, our colleague over at Rural Development, also put the list of all of the rural development assistance programs in the chat. So just wanted to bring that to everyone.
Thanks so much, Toby. There are a million great questions in both the chat and Q&A, and obviously not time for all of them. One that I would like to focus on is just the trend we've seen recently, exacerbated by COVID, of a lot of migration into rural communities and stresses on infrastructure. This is obviously a challenge, particularly in some of these smaller towns that have limited healthcare services. Their like sewage and plumbing sometimes can't handle an influx of thousands of people on a weekend. Just any comments from the panelists about efforts that you've seen to manage these new pressures, and just thoughts about ways that we can talk about Zoom towns moving forward, and what to learn for future communities.
Well, I'll jump in. I think there are a lot of aspects to this, and I think that that's a really important conversation that community groups have to have, is how much tourism is the right amount of tourism, and what types of tourism are the right amount of tourism for our community. Not only with your sort of cultural identity, but quantity. And you know, the concept of ecotourism really talks about sort of providing a niche opportunity for a small amount of people. And that tourism costs more, but it also requires more planning. And so there are different types. So let's not just focus 100% on mass tourism and, you know, putting people in beds of as many hotel rooms as we possibly can. There needs to be kind of a broader array of how you address those questions of what kind of tourism and how much in those communities. I'll leave it at that and give everybody else some time.
Yeah, I would echo that. Again, I think it comes down to that foresight and thinking about, as you grow your brand, your story as an outdoor recreation destination, what does that mean, and how do you take a holistic look? So it really isn't just about tourism revenues, if that's part of the plan at all, but to think about how to have that balance. And I think some of the most successful examples I've seen are where communities are really focused on programs from the very beginning that address, for example, affordable housing, and making sure that there are affordable housing programs in place that are there from the very beginning to make sure that residents don't get displaced. And it can't be an afterthought. I really think it has to be developed initially. And, you know, Cuesta is an example. The Cuesta Economic Development Team here in New Mexico has done a really creative, interesting job making sure that residents aren't displaced by companies like Airbnb, or that it's New Mexicans, it's residents of Cuesta who benefit from those potential revenues. I admire Moab's program to actually make sure that people living in that community can afford housing, affordable housing programs. So I'm sure there's a whole host of different examples across the country of what that looks like, but being really intentional with that development alongside any brand marketing you might do, I think is essential.
And I'll just add, I think the infrastructure issues that have been a part of barriers really to successful economic development in rural communities have been there, you know, for a very long time. And COVID-19 just, again, I think it's exacerbated where the gaps are, and whether it's an influx of people or just that, you know, new jobs can't even move downtown because of whether it's building infrastructure or wastewater treatment or other things. At a certain point, these collaboratives that are, you know, grassroots meet the top, and then the top also has to answer to the demand. So thinking about how policy changes or structure of the investments, what I do like about the toolkit is noting that there's limitations to match and generation of those types of funds that can be supportive of getting those big infrastructure, federal and state infrastructure grants to help get there. And these are usually multi-million-dollar programs where there's a lot of detail and data that needs to go there, and the capacity just might not be there. So to see how economic development in the traditional sense can create some openings here for the right scale for rural development, where it's not going to be measured on the number of jobs or the number of acreage of industry building that's needed to supply something, that it's really scaled to the needs of a downtown or the infrastructure for residents as they maybe grow or think about how they're going to be sustainable moving forward. So I think seeing that in trends and those conversations from the top down will be really interesting as these types of resources come together in the future.
Chris, I have one quick go back. I just wanted to highlight the fact that many of the grants and business services that are available through rural development focus on infrastructure. And so again, you know, just because something doesn't have the word recreation in it doesn't mean that it won't contribute to a recreation economy. So having the proper infrastructure in a downtown area, you know, contributes to a recreation economy. So you really have to think outside the box of what recreation is. It's not kayaks and bicycles. It's public bathrooms and pedestrian bridges and things like that. So really kind of having somebody who's thinking about it from that big picture perspective, or several people, or, you know, several organizations, is helpful.
Thank you so much, Toby. And recognizing that we're up on time, just on behalf of ORR, I'd just like to extend a big thanks to the three of you for participating in the panel today, as well as the development of this toolkit. This webinar was recorded, so if you were here today, we encourage you to share it with community members who may not have had the chance to view it live. And the toolkit is also live now, and it's as useful as it can be if it's in the hands of as many people as possible. So please share widely. Thank you everyone so much for joining. There were about 500 people on the call at points, and that is just so indicative of all the energy around recreation economy development. Have a wonderful day and look forward to talking soon. Bye.